too.
Well, it's in reference to the corn wolf, but it seemed to apply to both the articles we're talking about today, and certainly law and lawless land.
Oh, good.
And we didn't talk about it, or I didn't bring it up when we were talking about corn wolf. But it's the idea of the participant observation as you know, as a part of your field work. It's coming from the documentary world, where that's you know, a big debate. How much do you participate? Do you take the Michael Moore approach, where you not only participate but you twist and set up the situation, or are you taking the Verte approach, where you're removing yourself as much as possible? Yet the question is, how much are you bringing? You're making the viewer's experience of it subjective, where Michael Moore's becomes very subjective, where the Verte or the direct cinema approach is you're always on the outside observing, and it's even just a matter of taking the camera and bringing it closer to the eye line of your subject, giving the audience the impression that they are looking at them. But just the whole idea of the participant
right.
observer.
Well, this is such a huge and fascinating issue, and I don't think there's any no final word on this. But it's very important to at least recognize the possibilities and the advantages of the subjective viewpoints. Because normally, in social sciences, which tried desperately since the 19th century to claim the ground of science, claim the mantle of science, for legitimacy. And this is, this is no longer as folklore, no longer is it just a casual gossip. We're going out to study this problem and that social problem and so forth. We're going to have finally we've got a computer and we can have questionnaires. So anything that's subjective, the whole apparatus is designed to erase subjectivity, right? And so now and again people have tried, say, in anthropology, to bring bring the observer back into the picture. So observe the observer observing the observer, as well as the observed, or etc. You see where it goes. So I think people are a bit more relaxed about this in anthropology. Sociology, I think, is still and will always be pretty resolutely objectivist, and have no place for this participant observation, and rely on questionnaires and all that. But look, when I was younger, God, how many times do I say that? I used to get so angry and hot under the collar about the relationship between bureaucracy, capitalism, and positivism. And positivism is a big swear word, like fuck you or something. I mean, but it has its legitimate. I mean, people use the word positivism when they're just out of breath, angry often, and they just use it as a big label, and it can mean a lot of different things. No problem with that. It's an umbrella word, And there is, to my mind, I can't do it anymore. It's too much of a strain. But try and go through the links you see between the capitalist system, the world as a controlled field through bureaucracy, corporation, the sort of thing that Max Weber spent so much time on late 19th century, the iron cage, there's no way out of it, it'll only get bigger and bigger. This thought form called positivism, they're like, they're so thoroughly integrated. And I had a dinner with a young Italian woman that was at Columbia Public Health School doing a PhD. I was mentioning yesterday walking a couple of weeks ago up in the Bronx, and I asked her how it was going, and she told me the sort of stuff she's learning, and the talks that they have, the talk that she had to give, and I thought, oh God, I haven't faced this stuff, I haven't heard it for so long. I've been out of that for like 10, 20 years, and it was so shocking, especially when you're dealing with public health. What could be more important, really? And it's the same old positivist claptrap, and not abstract. Sartre called it, I don't know any philosophy, Jean-Paul Sartre called this abstract empiricism, as opposed to, say, sensuous empiricism or phenomenology. Abstract empiricism, we go around counting a lot of heads on this, that, and the other, and it's somehow immediately removed from real life. Well, you know, I sound very dogmatic, but that is the thought form of, how should I put it, academic and official social discourses. And so it's a very important point, you know, and when people try to bring in the observer observing, the observer is part of the observer in anthropology, there was so much, there's been so much opposition, you know, navel gazing, you know, is one of the favorite phrases, it's sort of like on the feminine as opposed to the masculine side, you know, there are all sorts of ways of putting this down. On the other hand, you know, people say, another phrase you hear is, I want to hear what life is like amongst the amongst the natives. I don't want to know about the life of the anthropologist. And that sort of seems fair enough, you know. But then the answer to that is, well, unfortunately, you can't separate them, you know, because you've got this person settled down here with the Inuit, you know, in, let's say, 1900, and writes this book, and making all sorts of choices about what to study, how to talk about it, and it's impossible to separate the Inuit from the observer sort of thing. So that's why it is a really hot, very important thing. I meet people, on the other hand, who say, you know, really, I can only read something if it's written in the first person. I mean, I just have to know. That's where honesty starts, you know, and you radiate out from your person. There was a very easy formula, which is much too easy. I think David said, you state your sentiments, attitudes, prejudices, biases, whatever you want to call them, on the first page, and let people know who and what you're thinking. And then you go on to your more, you know, objective account. It sounds a lot easier than it. I mean, the subtlety of the connections between one's being, and it can't be just, it's like they can't be pulled apart so easily, I don't think. In filmmaking, there was this documentary style, of course, with a strong voiceover, and the camera is hidden all the time, and you see what you see. And in the 70s and 80s, there were attempts to show the filmmaker in action. Next step was to get the people being filmed, like Terry Turner and Mr. Kaya Paul in Brazil, and many other people in places in the 80s, yeah, to get the people being filmed to get video cameras, because by that time video was becoming on the market, and make their own films. So there's a sudden rash of interest in Kaya Po. There's a language group in central Amazon to go and see Kaya Po films, which were just incredibly boring, you know. There's an expect one after the other, and all the PC people are sort of, you know, thinking this is sort of like the greatest and most wonderful thing. Other people said, you know, okay, so the Kaya Po making the movies, that's a big change, you know, progress and everything, but actually the way you look at the movie is still going to be your standard old Western way in which you've been trained. So are you really achieving that much? And so the critique keeps going on. But the notion of reversing the gaze, that phrase, reversing the gaze, comes out of film work, but you could apply it to writing and non-filmic modes of presentation. I met this guy, Aboriginal guy, Tony Birch in Melbourne, and he took me to a museum display that he had been asked to design. And it's called the very famous museum in Melbourne Museum or something. And you walk in, and there's this big, huge glass vitrine, I think they're called. You know, it's about that high, and it's about from here to the wall, and it goes maybe the length of this room. So I don't know how to draw it. This thing, and there's a chair here. And there's some old dodger in a hat and the suit sitting here. And the suit is very, very white, and it's covered with dust. And here, hanging down, thousands and thousands, hundreds of Aboriginal spears and spear throwers and stuff like that. You know, elegant sticks. really. And this is one of the founding fathers of Australian anthropology, who co-wrote with the Coast Band in Alice Springs, the Centre of Australia, this famous book called The Central Tribes of Australia, which was published in 1899, and Freud jumped on it, Durkheim jumped on it. It was very, very important in shaping the best intellects of Europe thoughts about primitive people. And so this is sort of reversing the gaze. You walk in and you see this, and Tony said that he wanted to have here a real live indigenous person standing here, I don't know, crossed arms, maybe a bush hat on, as the guardian of a sacred site. See, there's a huge hullabaloo in Australia since 30 years or so about Dreamtime and making land claims based on claims to the holiness of the place of the land in the particular linguistic group's view of the world. And if you can prove that this appears in the origin stories and songs and the dances and so forth, you're 9/10 of the way to getting that land and even the minerals underneath it. So this, there are no papers, of course, nothing, and it was all taken away in the 19th century. And on these lands, the outcrops, the waterways, the caves become very important parts of the songs, and the special outcrops can be called sacred sites, and only old people are meant to have the full knowledge. And there's men's knowledge and there's women's knowledge, and you go through initiation, and you know, ordinary uninitiated people not meant to know about these sorts of things. So they're called sacred sites. So what he wanted to do in terms of reversal of the gaze was have an Aboriginal in the museum and call this white guy looking at all the spears called a sacred site. So that was a sort of a notion of quite clever. I loved it, reversal. The museum people didn't let him do it. He could have the glass bit, but not the other bit. Still, he was happy with what he got. Participant observation is a very strange oxymoron or paradox. It means instead of interviewing a person for on a tape recorder or writing down what they say or getting them to write down a myth or something like that, you actually get involved in activities, building a house, harvesting, fishing, childbirthing, marriaging,
forming a shamanistic ritual.
Well, you try as much as possible as a jerky outsider, awkward outsider, to get involved and not just observe. But of course, it's very difficult for an outsider to really participate in it and create a lot of bullshit, you know. I studied about peasant agriculture a lot, and after a year and a half, I decided to rent a small piece of land with a local person and grow something, and then everything changed, completely and utterly changed, because I had to deal with real money, negotiate. I can't tell you how much it changed my understanding, because I participated in that way. I became a little landowner, so to speak, and it was all the nice relationships I had with people suddenly became real life relationships, and I thought that was all to the good. But I always remember that transitioning into the participation more than the observing part. But there's so many traps in all of that. I always like this cynicism in a little book of Foucault's called Birth of the Clinic. One thing I took away from it was the gaze of the doctor actually coming in to examine the sick person in a thorough, sort of modern scientific way. Was a movement of coming close in order to draw away. And participant observation, it seems, has some of that paradoxical quality in it, of getting closer to something, to be intimate, in order to have an objectivist language, in which the patient is treated as an object. And I was all into the intimate thing, and it's horrible to objectify people. But after I had some doctors trying to be intimate and everything with me, I thought, oh, fuck it. I think a doctor should be like a plumber to get the subject of intimate stuff. But I just want to be a bunch of tubes. And so I gave all that sort of romantic criticism away. But it's a complex and fascinating thing, this participant observation. And I'd like it to, I tried to some extent to connect Fictocriticism to fieldwork, wondering, what's in all that, and said I combined the words. I said there's fieldwork and there's writing work, and for that was for me that was an important move, and I'm not quite sure what to make of it, but it suggested to me that I wanted a relationship with reality in writing work. And then, now you've brought up this thing of fieldwork includes participant observation, and it should be in there. I've been always for decades so convinced of the need to have the observer observed, to have the filmmaker filmed, to have the writer written in. And there are two ways that I might go with that, or two things I would like to say now in conclusion. And one is, I like to see the hand of the writer, even if it's not written in the first person. And one way of thinking of that might be like with Brecht, where you have theatre shows the means of production. You show showing, as he might say. He has several poems on that. And that was, so you show showing, you show the means of production. You get some action on the stage, and then you'll have a chorus back here, one person, two or three people saying, look, and they'll do it in song, or the music will be in severe disjunction, emotionally maybe, to what's happening on the stage. These are a variety of what he was striving for, called alienation effects, to show showing, to show how you are being hauled into the narrative, and then he's going to make you step back and look at it. He thought a theatre should be, we're in the 20s and 30s, right? Very macho times, and unlike today, of course. And he said, the theatre should be like a boxing match. You sit around, you puff a cigar, and you watch what's going on, and you talk to your friend. And the theatre should always be full of people talking to one another. So it's really weird when you go to Brechtian. Like the inner city movie houses in America. Now, when something happens on the stage, the kids are up there, screaming and shouting. When I go to see a film with my avant-garde professor friends downtown in NYU, like Annette Markuson, she can't even stand someone laughing. Serious. And they're all eating the popcorn now. They're not allowed to say anything. Anyway, so that's very Brechtian, the popcorn, I guess. But I like in the writing to see you're aware of the writer making moves. The writer is reminding you that this is an artifact. I think that's so cool. And the other thing I wanted to say, completely different, is I went with a very close friend of mine who makes tons and tons of documentary, like Mary, and she speaks French perfectly, Polish person in Montreal, and there's a French movie made about two brothers who are aged about 70, living on a poor farm somewhere in France, and it just shows the round of like a 24-hour or a week of their life. And they live together, these two old guys, and they work really hard. It's really depressing. And it's absolutely meticulous in showing you from how you get up and what happens during the day. And they don't say much. And I'm going on about, this is horrible, it's this silly film, it's just show objectivists. You don't see the filmmaker at all, and so on. And she lit into me, and sort of straightened me out. And I said after a while, yeah, okay. So that's what I say. There's so many different angles to this issue. I don't know what's been your experience.
Well, I mean, it depends on. There's so many different kinds of genres of approaches.
Well, what do you like, or what determines your choice?
I suppose the content and the subject, and Albert Maysles, who's kind of the grandfather of direct cinema, verite in Albert Maysles. He did Salesman. He did Gimme Shelter about the Rolling Stones in the mid-70s. He says that you have to stay as objective as possible, but the participation is in really being interested in the person, really loving the person. I mean, he talks about loving, no matter who he's interviewing, or not interviewing because he doesn't interview, whoever he's filming, an unconditional love for them, a respect.
Something horrible. You like doing a critique. Let's say you made a film of Abu Ghraib or something.
I mean, his belief, there's a reason. There's reasoning and rationale behind what people do, and his.
So I see.
That's what he says. I don't always agree with. Well, actually, I don't agree with them because I think the technology is the hand of the filmmaker, and it's always present. But his role is not to judge, but is to observe. But my argument with him is the fact that you are there, and in this process of respecting the person, that the person is going to act differently. One, because of the technology there, but also because of your presence. Right. The question is, where the problem is, it becomes a paradox, is how much respect. Last film I did, I went and filmed a group of people, and they were under the belief that I agreed and supported everything that they did and said, which wasn't true, but I was trying to be objective about filming them. But because of their perception of me, it changed their conversation. Right. So you can't help it, but I'm still kind of exploring how much to participate, and how much I participate changes the honest reaction of who I'm observing.
Malinowski, in many ways, is like the great figure. You want to put some toss in?
Yeah. Well, my question was twofold. Like, I always question the term objective to begin with, especially when you're involved in a form of representation.
Yeah.
And then also, if you're speaking of that, also that spin-off of like, what subject matter you're addressing already implies a choice, right?
Yeah.
And then I kept thinking when you said judgment, Kubik's bone, the cut.
Yeah.
Every cut is a judgment.
You're absolutely right. And there is no objectivity because the mere fact that I'm pointing the camera at one place means I think I'm not being objective because I'm prioritizing, or I'm choosing to look at this, where in reality something else might be more important. Right. And every cut is.
I think you go back and forth and in many directions on this question, and you'll probably change your mind over the years what style of work you're going to do. But that doesn't mean to tolerate or be uncritical or not be skeptical about big claims towards scientific truth and so forth. I mean, that stinks. That's obviously like political and so forth. So, I mean, there doesn't seem to be any clear way which is better than another. But if there's strong claims are being made for, like the photograph, the ideology of the photograph is that it has a one-to-one relationship to reality, and that's a very powerful belief in societies today, and it's so easy to criticize that. But what's it called? An indexical relationship, what Peirce called an indexical relationship, the sort of one-on-one. There's light coming from an object that's making impact on the silver or silver, whatever it was, and so it seems like real. and the reality is very strong there. So you have to deal with things. I want to say in anthropology, Malinowski is considered in so many ways quite correctly as a great founding figure of the style of work and the style of writing, the style of thought. And his first book, which is still so important, printed in 1922, called Argonauts of the Western Pacific, about cooler trade, a special type of trade, and the Trobriand Islands off the east coast of New Guinea. Years later, as I was saying in this classroom, after his death, his diary for that fieldwork was published, and it's very emotionally wrought. And my feeling always was, wouldn't it have been such a better book if it was the two things had been put together? And I say that because I feel that by cutting off that aspect of the observer, you diminish the work, diminish the observer. I do believe that. Yeah, so anyway, I think maybe we've got to leave it there because you can end up just going around in circles this final comment.
Just a passing thought about this thought of Malinowski producing a work in one. We have many examples of that, right? Like Edgar Allan Poe writing his philosophy of composition after the celebrity of the Raven, Umberto Eco writing Postscript, The Name of the Rose. But I thought about this. Isn't it true, though, that the first work has to have a degree of authority, if not celebrity, in order to justify the second? I mean, Umberto Eco got away with writing that. Edgar Allan Poe got away with writing. I think advisedly got away, because I don't believe a word of what Poe said in that.
You mean there has to be a strong, what we might call a really impressive body of work, and then
reflect on it. Who would read a 25-year-old graduate student's diary on their voyage among n'importe qui, you know what I mean?
Well, stated like that is one way, but if we're talking about the work in itself, everything depends on what the work's like, right?
But that's my point. I mean, didn't Malinowski get authority by taking himself out of it, only to have the ability to put himself back into it later?
Well, you see, Malinowski was struggling in those days to legitimate talking about other people, especially dark-skinned people, by Europeans and so on and so forth. They had to try desperately to say what they were doing was a science. It was very important to him to not put himself into the picture as a weepy, strangulated, tied-up individual, who's thinking all sorts of other things than what's going on around him. And in the process, he gives you the impression, like he has this famous passage at the beginning. He says, the motorboat comes to the beach, my bags are taken off, here I am on the beach, all alone, and the boat takes off. And I see it sort of disappearing over the horizon. And I sort of turn around and face this world, just me and the natives. But when all this work, over a century, people go around and investigate. There was a British, what do they call him anyway, local administrator there, total bastard, and he was getting the natives to build roads, and there were no cars, anything, done in 1914, come on. He was making the chiefs stop growing coconuts. They had this monopoly, so they was really screwing with the political system. He had a jail, when Malinowski was let off, there was a jail. He had about 200 boxes and bags, you don't mention them, and so on and so forth. And so his first informants in another island, 6 months before, were prisoners in their jail. But you never know about it. It's just like this isolated this somehow the natives are doing this, and it's really fantastic stuff that he's describing. It's so important, I think, what he's describing as a critique, say, or giving you another vantage point on everyday life and the economy and religion and so forth in Western societies. And I think that's fantastic and powerful and strong. But it is weird that he has to erase all this backup that he has in order to create this. So it's not just an erasure of subjectivity, it's an erasure of some of the conditions, infrastructural conditions There was Billy the pearl trader, lovely guy, Greek guy, who was getting, buying pearls from the natives and paying them with tobacco, and it's incredibly interesting, how the payment works. Like they only work up to a certain amount of stuff, and then they say, we don't want to work anymore, we don't need any of your money, we don't need your tobacco, and they're not acting in a rational way like you're meant to. It's fascinating how these white traders try to operate in these completely different economic situations. There's a guy who's growing coconuts, and he's fantastic because he's got about 6 wives, native wives, and he chews betel nut, and he believes in sorcery and magic, and the natives all tell Malinowski that's why his coconut plantation is doing really well. Whereas all the other white guys, they stay white and drink a lot of whiskey. They don't have a lot of wives, and they don't, and so on and so on. All that stuff, in other words, you're dealing with colonial situations, and what happens is that the colonial part of the situation is erased, along with the troubled emotional aspects of life as the observer. And that's so much great anthropology, in fact, is like that. There's this complete erasure of the impact of the world in that tiny island or along the Bering Straits, wherever it might be. So, but listen, what about any questions on the law and lawless land? Anybody had an issue or something provocative or something insight into it?
Yeah, I had a couple of interrelated questions about page 117 in the text. So about halfway through it says that it seems like the Colombian countryside is being divided up between the paras and the guerrilla, leaving the state as a Baroque facade. Gone are the days when revolution demanded you attack and acquire the symbols of the sovereignty, such as the presidential palace, Congress, and whatever else constitutes the sacred center of the nation state. And so this was really exciting to me because, to tie it into one of the Benjamin readings for today, there's always the secret heliotropism that causes the flower to turn slowly again towards the sun in history. And I think this is when there is an uprising, it is ultimately, if it's victorious, it ultimately always, again, reincorporates the history of all the victories that came before, and hence carries on the tradition of all the victories and oppressions which came before. And so my questions were, first of all, since there is no central source of power, what was, I'm sure you did meet with activists who didn't fall into any of these groups of like the gangs and the paramilitary and the guerrillas. And so those people, the activism that they were doing, what was their aim without having this central source to focus their energy on? And also, did this affect what they wanted to achieve? So I guess what I'm asking is, they're aiming to, disrupt this very non-central form of, like these non-central forms of power, and is their goal ultimately to then impose some kind of central order, or do they have some other
people who don't belong to either of the groups mentioned, any of the groups mentioned. Well, in your quotation, I wanted to sound a note of caution about thinking politics is always about what I call the sacred center, which itself is a sort of what's the term? Ironic term, because it's not really sacred, but it's a reference to ancient kingdoms and so forth and so on. It's quasi-sacred, and I wanted to turn attention away from that. This always has to be the ultimate goal of a revolutionary activity, which itself is somewhat exaggerated on my part. I mean, given the world system today, if there's going to be a state, there's going to be a state capital, there's going to be a president, there's going to be a Ministry of Finance, and all this stuff. I mean, it's inevitable, but I sort of wanted to say, there's a lot of things happening which have a certain sort of autonomy, for good or for bad. Like, Colombia had 1,100 municipalities, and many of those municipalities at a certain point in time are indirectly controlled by the guerrilla or by the paramilitaries, and they keep really quiet, they keep in the shadow, and they have these sort of front people whom they'll call up on the phone or threaten their families or something like that. So there's a sort of there's the centre, there's the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of the Armed Defence and all that. But then, how much power do they really have, given this other sort of thing going on? And so I took it a little bit further than just that observation and said, you know, are we capable of thinking of a nation state in that form? So much more complex. Afghanistan must be very much like that with the so-called warlords, the Taliban, and you've just got so many different groups and regional power fiefdoms and so forth going on. I mean, the chessboard is like unbelievably 3, 4, 5 dimensional. Each square has got its own sort of thing going. But you know, there's also a president. There's also the U.S. president, and at the same time. So that was what is this group of people I've met who are in the middle? I don't know. They try small things, green politics, human rights stuff is enormously ubiquitous and important. You know, so many people are involved, and one NGO crops up after another, and then it dies away again, or becomes institutionalized. Church groups involved. There was one point in the 80s where you could not walk along a street like this and not meet peasants rushing along going to some NGO, leaving their crops to look after themselves. It was like insane how many foreign-funded NGOs are operating there. And I imagine that's much of the world as well.
So basically there haven't been any other innovations, it's just like other little groups trying to basically do what these groups are doing.
Right. I think of my friend, the photographer, turned nurse and with the little clinic for the kids in the street, you know, who are prostituting themselves and got all and every which disease and no future. I mean, that's the sort of thing I can think about. Or peasants who've got together and tried to create some sort of different cropping system. The girl who appears in the front of this book is rushing off to a meeting of women in advanced pregnancy who are going to give birth, and has found some little niche, so maybe it's a little bit of money. So these are very micro things. I would say that in terms of beliefs and so forth, it's much bigger than that. But in terms of crystallized activities, I'd say there's thousands. They're all very tiny. I don't know.
Yeah, there are many examples anyway. I mean, like the Comunidad de Padres San Jose. It's a very good example.
Yeah, I'm not really looking,
Yes.
like I'm not interested so much in like the particular groups, but different ways of
Conceptualizing the whole.
of resisting basically something that you see as oppressive.
It's sad, but you know, one of the ways that you see that people is resisting such is because it's a very traumatic place, you know, for everyone almost. So one of the first levels is that you see that people kind of rejects that kind of reality, you know, at least in the big cities. So you also have this very thick kind of skin there to protect from the news, to protect from that reality, and everyone tries to go into football and to soccer football and to the beauty queen contest, and this is the society, the one that could be doing something, you know, the one that could put the votes in the right place, the one that could be putting, you know, some force into place to fix at least the reality of some marginalized community that at the end of the day sum up to be maybe 70% of the population or something like that. In the neighborhoods and the countryside, there's all kinds of conflicts putting people in their line of death, you know, every day. I don't know. I mean, there are many examples, but
Someone else got a couple of questions or issues that they brought with them? Speaker.
I was wondering about form a little bit. Just having, it's a completely different issue and question. I guess the question reduces itself to why do you write? Because there's so much in all the writings that you've given us, and so much in the Benjamin and your own stuff that just points to this despair of what writing is to you and how you have no hope.
When you say despair, you mean because situation politically?
I think it's more about representation and telling stories properly. Like, but to get the basics, this is from your I Swear I Saw This. But to get the basics, why draw on notebooks? In my own case, if not in others, one reason I suspect is the despair, if not terror, of writing. Because the more you write in your notebook, the more you get this sinking feeling that the reality depicted recedes, that the writing is actually pushing reality off the page. So
But the question is why write?
yeah.
And the answer seems to make it worse, not better.
Right.
Or is it a description? It's a description of why that is a question, rather. Why write if writing seems futile?
Yeah.
And not futile in a political sense or effect on a readership, but it's that the writing seems to be inadequate to what is being written about.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had that feeling.
I mean, I don't think I read as much as you.
I
I don't think I write as much as you do.
Yeah, but
And
that might be the answer. I mean,
Yeah.
there's something about journal writing or trying to describe a situation that you feel is urgent that can make you despair that you're not doing justice to what you're writing about.
I suppose a simple way of looking at it might be, what else could you do, right? Like, what other forms could you approach, or there's that sort of basic question of what it is that writing does do for you if it doesn't do that.
Well, I don't know. I think you keep doing it because you don't really want to answer that question. I mean, you're hoping next day will be better or easier, and you've just got to keep going. And the second part, and I've got some good hands here. The second part of an answer might be because when you reread, like as I was saying yesterday, when you reread, you start to see stuff that wasn't there on the page, and you have these afterthoughts that I spent a fair bit of time on in the last piece of the reading that you had from Norman Lowenstein, and that's where the images seem to me very important. And so there's two I answer in two ways. There's always a hope that you'll get it right, and for some reason that I don't understand, and this might be the real question, is why do you do it in the first place? Why do you keep going? Why do you insist on trying to keep a record?
In that way.
The second part is that actually, inadequate as it might seem at the time, it tends to be a lot stronger than you credit. But I'd be interested to hear other people's experience if they've also had this feeling that the writing just goes down a tube.
Well, personally, I've experienced this quite strongly, and I think for me it comes back to this act of bearing witness as this, when there's nothing else, that seems to be, at the very least, you can bear witness and convey your experience in the situation and have it exist, at least in your account. And
Yeah, I mean, if you put it that way, it becomes, it takes the writing out of the issue of being effective in communicating between two or more people, right? Or communicating with yourself. And this manuscript here, I swear I saw this, is, without saying it too often, or saying it very often, I think it comes to that conclusion, but it says, well, what is it for witness? And that's an incredible question. There's a book on George Orwell, who, when my education was in Australia, Commonwealth country, British colony, Commonwealth country, George Orwell was often held up by the high school teachers as the model of clear writing. There's a short study of George Orwell by the really celebrated, really wonderful professor of drama at Cambridge, Raymond Williams, who wrote books like Marxism and Literature and so on, and a Marxist of sorts, now dead. And in the book on Orwell, he has a chapter called Becoming a Writer, when Orwell decides that he will try and make a living as a writer. And he writes to his mother and says, this morning I go out or whatever, and I've decided to become a writer. And it's all like drawing the curtains, all very marked out. And he says, not one of these, and I forget what he says, but it's definitely like not one of these womanly writers who fuss about with this and that, but something else completely different, because I guess he thinks that writing is somehow feminine. Well, of course, most of the writers who get published are male, and it's completely crazy. But there's something like, he can see he's feeling guilty that being a writer is like somehow a dishonest profession, and it's something like needlework or something. It's crazy stuff. And then, Williams goes on and says, the trouble with Orwell's theory of writing is that language is not simply a means to an end. It's not simply a communication between one person and another, but and here the phrasing gets awkward and it's not as clear as it might be, but it's a form of experience in itself, something like that. And so moving away from the notion of, say, we might call instrumentality of communication, of writing or film art, to some other sort of notion. When Benjamin, in here somewhere, I read yesterday, talks about language as a theatre rather than a means of communication, the play of language itself, something like that. That's not the same as witness. That's a second possibility, I guess, we could be thinking about. So maybe we can keep the question of witness for tomorrow, because it comes up so much in this, but I'm really grateful you brought it up, and I'd like people to be thinking about what it might mean.
It was more an observation of what you said, the impression that I got from what you were saying was, if this is difficult, just to use a different word, or what was the word? It wasn't difficult.
Terror? What?
Terror? No, the one.
Which word? I'm sorry.
Did you say terror and another word with D?
Despair?
Despair of writing?
Despair. Okay, that's right. What struck me about what you said was like, well, if you despair or you have this sort of tension in the process, why don't you pick something else? So to me that point, I resist that, because to me that's like, I find the beauty in the process and in the resistance of the process. And it's, it often happens to me also that I write something and you're like, it's not saying what it's supposed to say, and actually it's saying way more than you think it is.
And how can that be?
I don't know, I think it goes back to an issue of control, or like this thing of like, well, it's not flowing this way, therefore maybe I should pick something else so that it flows, and to me it points at a sense of efficacy rather than an unfolding, or a mystery that might not be present at this moment, but that is, it's constituent of everything that would emerge from that. Or,
It's almost like
emerge as a writer.
It's almost like a creative constraint kind of argument.
Also, so
It's almost like a creative constraint type argument.
yeah. I was going to throw in something that may not be helpful, is thinking of the difference between writing a letter to a friend or writing an email, as compared with all this angst that I'm expressing about keeping a journal. Because I don't think I would feel that in an email whatsoever. And I would often think that letters and emails are far more expressive.
I was thinking
so
you
why
should.
can't you tell people, well, why don't you write your thesis like you write an email? And the minute the words are out of your mouth, it's a ridiculous thing that the person will not do this and not be able to do this. And, I ask, why?
I was going to say, I was thinking you should write a comic book.
Me in particular, or one?
Well, just because of the issues that come up in that piece about drawing and the other forms that involve writing and graphic styles and things that have to do with other conversations we've had in here about pacing.
Yeah, that's a real art though, boy. Did you guys see V for, what was it, V for Vengeance? V for Vendetta? Yeah. Anybody else here see it? Yeah, Alan Moore.
Yeah.
And, he was a kid from a very poor family in the north of England, and all he did was read comic books. And he got beaten up by the system, something really bad, and then he started slowly moving into graphic, into comics, and then wrote this amazing film. Yeah, right?
Well, the comic is much better than the film. The comic is much better than the film. The film is okay, but the comic is considerably more subversive. there's a lot of sort of subtext they took out that, you know, stuff about LSD and that was removed, and how B's backstory, like, it wasn't in the film. I highly recommend it. It's a bit, Alan Moore is not subtle. He writes, you know, very, very strong metaphors. It's obvious who the bad guys are, why they're the fascists. It's obvious, but still.
But the style is so, it's the style that carries the crudity into great art, right?
He also wrote The Watchmen, which was The Watchmen, which they made into a film quite recently. He wrote that as well, which is even better.
There's a US Joe Sacco. Have you seen his comics? The one on Palestine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an amazing piece of work. SACCO, Palestine. Yeah. Saeed wrote the introduction to that. Thanks for the suggestion. That's a whole other field to think about. Any other? So I don't know if I've answered you very well. I guess I use that sense of despair partly to poke fun at yourself and wonder why you're doing these things, and partly to raise the issue about the relationship between writing and reality, and make it vivid, a vivid problem. I guess there's much more to be said. I mean, why it would appear in the journal form much more, I think, than other things I can think of, novels, poetry. I mean, all art forms have have a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, you'd think in a journal it would be straightforward and simple. But if you think you're documenting something and it's slipping away from you all the time, that's a sort of nasty feeling. If you're sitting down in your room and got 4 months to write a film script or something, the problem is completely different. It's not like you're not keeping up with this crazy real life around you.
A bit of a naive question. In your case, is writing your practice, or is writing a reflection on your practice, or is it both?
Yeah.
Because
That's so important.
Just I want to hear your answer, but while we're listening to you, think, when Freud wrote, was his practice, or was his writing his practice?
No, his writing was not his practice. And I've been thinking about the talks in the evening.
Yeah.
And you see, I've already been to how many talks have we had? 4 or 5? And you see incredibly different style. But no one ever talks about the performance or the style as a mode of thought or mode of accessing truth. It's the content, it's the principles. What this person said can be put into 5 principles, and that's how you'll talk about it with your friends and so forth. But really, you'll be so influenced by the overall composition. And I don't, if I use a word like performance or rhetoric, I think you've already lost it somehow, because, performance, yes, rhetoric, yeah, this person is soft-spoken and doesn't vary and uses these sorts of metaphors, and this other person is in a completely different, music. But it's how these things come together, how form and content come together, that is so crucial. And I think what Freud wants to do is get across an idea, a theory, in the clearest, most efficient way he can.
People have made the argument that.
But when Nietzsche's writing, he's writing his philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm certain if you think of how Freud is writing, there's probably this patient sifting, and that it's probably like being an analyst. Although as an analyst he probably said very little. Just that smoke going up.
No, he said a lot more than he writes. Because the patients wrote their own accounts of the analyses, and he was much more active and verbal than one would think from reading his work.
Mm-hmm.
The only great prize he won in his lifetime was the Goethe Award for literature contribution. Was the Goethe Award for contribution to German literary culture.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't win a scientific prize.
He didn't what?
He did not win a scientific prize or a medical. He was expecting the Nobel Prize in medicine, but he got the Goethe Award for writing. So it's a serious question. Is his practice writing, or was his practice his?
Yeah, I guess listening to you in the back and forth, I guess once again, one implies the other. And
Sorry?
one,
But in your case, then, is your writing your practice, or is it a reflection on your practice?
well, I use the reflection on the practice as, I'd say that was primary. Have you guys ever read Hilda Doolittle, the famous American poet who wrote under the name H.D. Greg? Yeah. Because you've got that D.S. Lawrence collection. She was analysed by Freud in the year before, or 2 years before Freud had to leave Vienna for London because of the National Socialists. That's why I got the tobacco, the smoke going up into the ceiling, and he wouldn't say much, and he would play a lot, she said, with these figurines. By that time he had a pretty massive collection of Middle East figurines. He was crazy about them, and he would play with them and put them and shuffle them around. And she, as a poet and someone who's sort of given a little bit to mysticism and so forth, she was very into the way he would talk about archaeology and have these things from Mesopotamia and so forth, and relate the two together. And if you go to the Freud house in Hampstead, the whole thing was shifted from Vienna to Hampstead, and you really should go and have a look at that layout of all those, ancient figurines and so forth. And she says at one point in there, he comes out with the cigar and everything, he's got this mechanical jaw now, it's all full of cancer or stuff, and he says, "You don't love me anymore." It's just the most amazing part of the book. So I guess he did say something. the guy who had the hour before her, she and Freud called the Flying Dutchman, and he was this rich Dutch guy who was about 6'6", and he was a big aviator, and one day he got on his plane and never came back. It's a great book. HD Tribute to Freud. It's only about 60 pages long. Okay, in the time that's left, let's talk a little bit about the storyteller, and then coffee, and then pieces. So I'll talk a little bit about my notes here. How many people have, this is the first Benjamin that they've read, so I just get an idea of background knowledge and stuff like that. So everybody's read some Benjamin. Okay. How many people have read The Storyteller? So what have you guys been reading? That's the best one. They say Unpacking My Library is the best one. I love Unpacking My Library. Which one did you read?
Theses on the
Theses,
book.
yeah.
And also concept of critique of violence.
Oh, that's the one that they keep teaching all the time in universities, and it's totally impossibly difficult. I just don't teach it anymore. Yeah, but that is the yes, right. That is the number one. Anybody else read anybody read The Storyteller? Well, it's great if you haven't, because I think it's all new. Well, The Storyteller, in my opinion, Fred Jameson thought The Storyteller was the great, most accessible essay by Benjamin. I don't know how accessible you find it. Benjamin was born about sometime in the 1880s to a rich Jewish family in the West End of Berlin, and the family lost all its money in the crash of the late 20s, and from about 1925 on, he was basically a pretty penniless guy who lived off book reviews and radio stories for kids. I thought I might mention these because they weren't known to a lot of people until fairly recently. And some of them have been translated, and you find them very easily in the Harvard 4-volume collection of selected works of Benjamin. And I really think you should read them. And if had more time and thought more, I would put a couple in this course. They're fantastic. They're like 20-minute radio talks to 12-year-olds. And the tone of voice, the sorts of things that are talked about, show him to be a great storyteller. These are stories about the real world. These are stories about the famous earthquake in Lisbon. They're stories about people who travel south from Chicago to New Orleans on the train in the 20s, and who buy liquor from small African American boys who are selling tea on the railway station because of prohibition, and everybody assumes that it's liquor, and then they haul it into the cabin and it's tea. And most of the stories are about deception and power, really. But it's not like he is a storyteller himself in many respects. His stories might call them real life stories. His basic interests, I would say, why he stands out so much. He was only translated into English, as far as I know, in late 60s. But it's not so long ago. And he died by his own hand. As people presume he killed himself in 1940 on the Spanish-French border. His basic, if you had to stand way, way back and say why is he considered important to to a lot of people, it's because he tried to combine religion, magic, and Marxism, and that was unheard of, because Marxism was considered very materialistic. Of course, these terms now we don't know really what they mean. What is it to be materialist? There are so many different ways of being materialist, and so forth. But that's why his work caused a stir, and some people, of course, just can't stand it because it reminds them of all the dangerous things about mysticism and superstition and so forth. And that's what the Nazis were famous for, combining blood and land and folklore and mysticism and so forth. So the enlightened liberal reaction is to just get rid of all that once and for all. And I think the answer of someone like Benjamin, if he had to answer that challenge, or anxiety, would be to say, well, why is that such an effective force? Why is spirituality and materialism, why is spirituality and capitalism, etc., why is religion such a potent force in politics? You've got to face it head on. You can't just develop a theory which is a materialist theory and says all that stuff is junk. That would be how he would answer. But I don't think he would have answered it in that way anyway, because when he was a high school student with his friend Gershom Scholem, very talented students, they were very concerned with the way their parents were becoming good Germans and completely sending being Jew as something under the table. They wanted to be closet Jews. They wanted to be Germans. They were very upset that they weren't fully recognized by the main society, and so on and so forth. Scholem, his friend Scholem, went off to be a professor in Palestine in the 20s and became this world figure on the Kabbalah. And books are very famous, and he was always asking Benjamin, come to Palestine because you'll be safe here and there's such important work to do and so on. And Benjamin always resisted. And Benjamin, on the other hand, had his friend Bertolt Brecht, who was this feisty materialist poet. And so Benjamin, in a way, you can see him as between these two poles. We'll never know him which one to. Trying to be a diplomat and sit in the middle. He translated with a friend the first two volumes of Proust's In Search of Lost Time. And I think of the best way of thinking of Benjamin is to think of him as actually a Marxist Proustian. And that sounds like crazy. But honestly, if you read this instance, this way the image will pull out an image from the past. The famous thing in Proust is this memoir involontaire, one of the famous things in Proust. And the taste of the Madeleine, which was the first example of this, brings back memories of a particular incident in childhood where his aunt, who was always lying in bed, by the window in a village on the second floor or something. We give him these melons, these little biscuits, cookies, and with this taste and the tea. And then as the memory, when his mother gives him the melon when he's in his 30s, let's say, and he has this feeling of something tugging at him, a memory, and he can't figure out what the memory is. He tries hard and hard, as hard as he can. No, so he just stops trying to think what it is, and then suddenly it dawns on him, it comes flooding forth, this memoir, involuntary memory, and he remembers his aunt, he remembers the window, he remembers the village, and then it gets bigger and bigger, like throwing a stone into a pond. The ripples get wider and wider, and he talks at the end of the chapter about these little Japanese fold-up pieces of paper that you throw in water, and they expand out like a flower. He says that this memory has a totally corporeal effect. It's not just a mental image, if I don't know what just a mental image means, but it is very corporeal. And he talks about it almost in orgasmic terms. I mean, jouissance and all that. I mean, it's like very powerful physical effect, see, this memoir involuntary. And there are different examples. One could be the sound of the fork in a certain situation. Another could be just the texture of the linen on the tablecloth. It'll, do the same sort of thing. So it's that sense, complex, visceral sense of something in the present. So when Brian's talking about non-sensuous correspondence, and you get the clang of a fork, and you get this completely other thing. You get a taste on your tongue, and you get this completely other, nothing to do with taste, etc. That's, I think, very wonderful and useful to think about. Hey, wow, you read the thesis in the philosophy of history, and what would happen if you applied some wanking athlete like Proust, to Marxism-Leninism? It's quite a shock. And of course, the thesis has not only got that, no mention of Proust, but it seems to me it's pretty obvious that that's one of the really strong echoes in that. That's sort of like the mimetic faculty and the non-sensuous correspondence then. Except it's applied to memory, and memory is applied to history. That's a big jump, and I can't help you on that one. And the other side of it, of course, is equating the revolution with the Messiah, which he takes from Shalom, and he takes from the Kabbalah. So in all of that, you can start to see a very heady cocktail. According to who you are, you find it fascinating, or you just think it's, I'm not going to go there. One other essay I thought I might mention is his interest in surrealism. To give you a sense of his fascination with fragmentary montage and collage. Montage is extremely important to him. His PhD thesis was on his second PhD, the Habilitationschrift, which is like the super PhD. Wolfgang hasn't introduced one here yet. Yeah, well, you can't get a job in Germany with a PhD, sorry to tell you. You've got to have this Habilitationschrift, and that can take hundreds of years. How many people, and no one could understand his Habilitationschrift, so Paul Van never got a job. He just knew straight away. They basically told him, said, look, what on earth does this mean? Out of here, out of here. And then he came across a guy, 4 years later, in the, late 20s, called T.W. Adorno. His actual name was Weissenblum, but his mother, who was an opera singer, had an Italian name, Adorno, and Adorno changed his name from Weissenblum to Adorno as a sort of anti-German, anti-Nazi thing later on. So we know him as Adorno, but for a long time he was Professor Weissenblum or whatever. He said, there's this young philosopher in Frankfurt teaching my thesis, my Habilitationschrift, and the guy's ecstatic about it. I hope he can get me a job. But he didn't. That Habilitationschrift was called the origin. In English, it's translated apparently not all that well. The origin of German tragic drama, and it was about the Baroque of Spain, and to some extent Shakespeare, being picked up by German playwrights, and he studied these completely forgotten plays that were called Baroque, and from that he got his famous concept of allegory, and allegory turned into the avant-garde concept of montage. So just to give you, I know everything I'm saying has 1,000 question marks behind it, but I just want to give you a bit of just a vague sense of where he was coming from. He loved children's books. He had an incredible collection of children's books. He wrote those beautiful reviews of books on children's toys, and he loved thinking about how children learn to write. He was much more interested in writing than speaking, and that people think of that as a Jewish thing, that focus on the word, and especially the written word, and the ban on images in Islam and in Judaism. I could go on with a lot of stuff. Storyteller was written in 1936, towards the end of his life, when he was probably, maybe 56, something like that. His apartment was taken away by the Nazis in 1932. They don't come in and take the apartment away. Some guy comes down and says, the gas lighting is not up to standard. The plumbing needs such and such. You know what I mean? So it's not like someone actually physically hauls you out of something. They just make it impossible for you. Then Jews couldn't work in Germany after 1933, so there's no more radio stories. He couldn't get paid for his reviewing. And so he lived a lot of the time in Paris and tried to eke out a living there. Shalom told him to come to Israel, Palestine as it was called, and he could never make that move. And when the Vichy capitulated, or the Vichy government was set up in the Second World War, any German-speaking people were interned in Paris, and he spent a few months in a camp, and there he met a guy called Fictocriticism, who was a watchmaker, a German worker, who had been very important in the German resistance to Hitler. And Fictocriticism said, if ever you get out, if you want to get out of this country, go and see my wife. She's about 19, and she lives in Marseille, in a little town out of Marseille. Her name is Lisa, and she'll be able to help you. And so Benjamin at least got his shit together to go there, and I met Lisa in the late 80s. She lived in Chicago, and she did this famous thing of taking refugees, communists, famous poets and artists and so forth, who would be very important to the Nazis, out of France, across to Spain, and from Spain they would go to North Africa or Portugal. And that's what the film Casablanca is based on. You've all seen Casablanca, right? Rick's Cafe. Well, that's that story, really. And, sort of that story. And he knocked on the door, and they started to talk, and how did you get here, and so on. And he'd given up smoking cigarettes, not a bad heart, he said. Given up smoking cigarettes, and she said, well, that's a funny thing. He said, given it up in this camp. It's not a concentration camp, it's like just something not very nice, but outside of Paris. And said, they gave it up in the camp. He said, well, I would have thought that's when you need cigarettes. And he said, oh no, a situation of crisis like that, that's when it's good for giving up those sorts of things. And she thought that was weird. She'd never read a word of Benjamin. She tried. Said she couldn't understand them. And Sheldon got her to write a memoir of her taking Benjamin across the Pyrenees. And she said she belonged to the Young Communist Party in Germany, and he crossed that out and said progressive movement and so forth. When they got to Banyuls the night before, she was going to take him over the Pyrenees together with two German women and someone else, some other man. And she was very friendly with the mayor of the town, who was like sort of French underground, insofar as it existed then. And she said, you're going to go up this goat path because the normal path, there's too many soldiers around or something. And now we're going to go home and have dinner and go sit. He said, no, I'm going to sleep on the path because don't know, that's what I'm going to do. And he was in a suit and everything. He had this big briefcase. So why am I telling you all this stuff? So when I found out that Lisa Ficker lived in Chicago, this was the most maddening thing. Someone said, "Oh, you Lisa Ficker around the corner." I said, "You've got to be joking, you know." And so in those days, I called on a coin telephone because I was doing a call from the house. In those days, there were no cell phones. And she answered the phone, and I said, "Oh, I'd love to talk to you about Walter Benjamin." And immediately, she's so practical and down to earth. She says, "Oh, you're looking for the briefcase." And my heart just sank because I was so into this like hero worship thing, and she wanted to interpret me as interested in something as banal as the fucking briefcase, which is, heavenly manuscript that everybody in the world was searching for. I didn't care about any manuscript or any briefcase. I just wanted to see her, and I knew it was one of those moments that you have them in your life. You know you can't explain. You just know you can't explain. And you know you're headed for hell, you know they're going to keep the wrong impression. So I didn't say anything. But I went round to visit her, and she told me a lot of interesting stuff, some of which are related. And she's written 2 books about her life and all of that. Benjamin had this briefcase, and he said it was full of very important stuff. And people thought this was a great work that nobody knew about. But now most people think it's what we call the Paris Arcades. I don't know if any of you have seen that. Yes. I think Brian was quoting parts from it last night. That's a 1,052-page in English that first came out in German called the Passagenberg, where we can talk about. That's a whole seminar in itself, not just a class. Every 5, 10, 15 or 20 minutes he had a watch. He would lie down on the path because he said he had this bad heart. And she said it was just the most amazing experience taking this guy into Spain. And when they got into Spain, of course, there was a new law. Couldn't accept anybody who didn't have this special sort of stamp, And but the Spanish took pity on him and said he could stay the night, and he took an overdose of morphine. They all carried morphine. He tried to kill himself 3 or 4 times before. Anyway, he was totally lonely, and just like very, very sad guy in some respects. And at least I can think of one time, and I think it was more than one time that he tried. And it was not uncommon for those refugee types to carry morphine and other drugs, often in their false tooth or something like that. Not the morphine, you need a bigger container. It's a pretty dramatic time, and so lots of people have written plays, and Brecht wrote a poem about this apparent suicide. There are stories in Barcelona you can hear, that he was actually off by the SS. I think that's probably incorrect. Okay, the storyteller in 1936, 4 years before that, he's working on this thing that became the Paris Arcades, which is just a bunch of files going from A to L. They just got a letter. And the idea was to write a history of capitalism through these first department stores, which were actually arcades, long before anything like a department store. And they all have very peculiar topics, like gaslighting might be one, prostitution might be another. Oh God, my brain is going away with me. I'll come back to this. About 24 of these files. He just keeps adding material, and it's largely quotation. And he said he always wanted to write a book which was just quotation. That was his dream. And this book is pretty much, I'd say, 85% quotation. And he worked very hard on that during the 30s. He also wrote 2 big essays on Baudelaire, which was one of his okay?
Yeah, just birds trying to fly.
He had 2 summers in Ibiza, which I think were really wonderful for him. But that's where he wrote the mimetic faculty, and that's where he got really off on the moonlight casting its shadows and the doctrine of the similar and so forth. He wrote these intertexts, or these, I'll call them fictocritical texts, in which he talks about his dreams. He's smoking hashish, and he experimented a lot with drugs, as did a lot of German intellectuals in the late mid-20s to the mid-30s. And he took opium with a French painter called Seltz, who just comes across as the most wonderful, remarkable man. And these short texts that Benjamin wrote combine drugs, dreams, ethnography, and little stories. In the Harvard selected works, it's called Spanish interlude or Ibizan interlude. But now we'll get to this. So the storyteller comes along in 36, and it's preceded by a couple of stories. I was never told this, and I don't know if I can do justice to it. He got incredibly interested in stories aboard ship, and he caught the ship from Hamburg to Barcelona, or I guess, and Barcelona to Ibiza. Anybody been to Ibiza? And amazing island, just so beautiful. Now it's just rich people and kids who go there for the weekend to destroy themselves with drugs. But in the 30s, it was the poor person's island, and exquisitely beautiful. I mean, you can go there and you still see the beauty, right? But it's all multi-millionaires around and so forth. Plus, there's crazy planes coming in from Manchester, disgorging, kids who never even see the island. They could just go into an aircraft hangar for 48 hours. I don't know why they go to it either. There's two stories I remember. One is called The Handkerchief, and I forget the name of the other. But he would listen to these stories on the ship, even though it was quite a short voyage. And that's where I think his ideas about boredom, the relationship with the importance of boredom and storytelling come out for one thing. And later on maybe I'll tell you about that beautiful, I thought it was a beautiful story he wrote. About this attempted rebellion by these German sailors taking these boats to Chile for nitrate at the end of the First World War. And this incredibly nostalgic story about it from the ship's captain, who keeps himself out of the story, but it turns out it's obviously him. Amazing story. So let's look at what's going on in the storyteller. I made some headings which I call big topics. The first topic I have is experience, and I think that comes out of one thing you noticed in this storyteller. It consists of, do you remember how many parts are in it? Yeah. How many parts, sections?
19.
Yeah. 19. Yeah, 19. And do you remember at a certain point he talks about a ladder? 1, 2, 3, I've got it, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you can put in, I think, 9, can I do that? 9, and put 10 here, and then go 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, I'm really nervous, I don't know what's going to work out. 17, 18, 19. So this is the ladder of, this is death. This is the ladder of experience. It's not many, there was Nargis Irani from Iran who showed me this. She worked on carpets, and I always wanted to get her article published, and schools would not publish it, and I haven't got the article here, so I can't quite remember exactly how it works. But she says that there's this correspondence across like that, and that you go down and you go up, and that Benjamin says that halfway through the essay that the storyteller is always happy or is very gifted at working up and down the ladder of experience. So that set her off, and she started looking for these type of correspondences. Death being there's 2 or 3 sections on death, but that sort of acts as a pivot point for starting the ascent. what I want to emphasize right now is the importance of experience. And those of you who have been attending Brian and Aaron's classes have probably picked up on how complicated the simple word is. Benjamin distinguished at certain points, not in this here so much, between Erfahrung and Erlebnis. And these are two types of experience, if you like, in German. And one is the experience of the lived instant, which you could equate with shock. You have this incredible sudden experience, and it's like over before you can experience it. And that's his way of summing up European modernity. And that shock was a huge deal, right, with avant-garde, with the surrealists and so on in the 20s. The Dadaism out of which grew surrealism. I mean, huge emphasis on shock. And Freud had written this book called Beyond the Pleasure Principle, I think 1922 is it, or 1919, where Benjamin used Freud's Beyond the Pleasure Principle to work through his essays on Baudelaire, which is, it becomes an organizing principle for him. And Beyond the Pleasure Principle is all about, not all about, but is an essential part of this very short book, is to theorize a concept of shock. I might go into it after the coffee. So there's the lived instant, which is associated with shock, okay? But it's hard not to historicize it anyway, to have a before and an after. Before shock, there's a type of experience that's associated with habit, and it's of a long duration that you can meditate upon. The opposite, if you like, of what I just described. And when Benjamin, the essay on the storyteller, ties the story in with the Erfahrung type of long experience, shall we call it that. And he says that right at the beginning and right at the end. And that's, for example, why Nargis would have put 1 and 19 as soulmates. And it's incredibly beautiful, I think, the ending of the essay where he quotes Valéry. Valéry's a fantastic guy to know, I guess. Paul Valéry wrote in a very remote context, we're at 19 now, right? Having sounded the bell right at the beginning with 1, the storyteller is tied up with the decline in ability to experience. Talking about Western Europe, right? Lost my place. And Valéry says, artistic observation, and Valéry's talking about a woman artist whose work consists of silk embroidery. Artistic observation, looking at the silk embroidery, can attain an almost mystical depth. The objects on which it falls lose their names. Light and shade form very particular systems, present very individual questions, page 108, which depend upon no knowledge and are derived from no practice. This really makes art interesting, right? But get their existence and value exclusively from a certain accord of the soul, the eye, and the hand, of someone who was born to perceive them and evoke them in his inner soul. So there's this soul, hand, eye thing going on. And this is craft, artisanry. And artisanry, say, as opposed to factory production. And Nargis' whole thing is, in fact, this craft. The very ladder I've got here is a piece of craft. Benjamin says, what about the origin of the story, or something like that, right at the beginning, maybe number 2. And he has this idea of the story comes about from the person who stays at home and the person who goes away. And the person who goes away comes back to the person who stayed and has some stories. And we read then about the sailors, and we read about artisans who travelled through Russia, because the whole essay is supposed to be a review of Nikolai Leskov. He wrote these wonderful little stories in the 19th century. And Leskov was a wandering, not so much wandering, but a travelling salesman, selling stuff from England and all those fancy civilized countries to the hicks in Russia. And Leskov had an enormous amount of experience of both with merchandise and foreign goods and the provinces. There's also a German he talks about, we don't have to complicate things. So the story comes from the artisan, from the sailor, and Benjamin completely forgets, it seems to me, that most occupations in the cities of Russia and Western Europe in the 19th century were women servants, which you see a lot in the Third World today. The girls are, under the tough discipline of their mothers, sweeping the floor and looking after the kids and cooking meals and so forth. They're the ones who are going to go into Buenos Aires and Bogota and Cali and Mexico City and so forth. And they're the ones who are going to leave home. And they're the ones who are going to come back home and talk about, well, pre-television days anyway, it was a big deal, talk about these amazing worlds that they're part of, for good or for bad, right? So, but they're not mentioned, obviously, in this thing. But I wanted to emphasize the role of the artisan, because in that number 2, Benjamin already sounds this note of the artisan learning the secrets of matter, learning the secrets of silver, of leather, of glass, of wood, in a tiny workshop of, say, 3 or 4 people. And so that's the sort of model that he wants you to have in your mind, that these people are talking as they work, they're interacting and talking about properties of the materials that they're making, their living depends upon. Also, the younger ones are probably going from master craftsman to master craftsman. So that's like the setup. And at the end, number 19, we come back to that picture. With these words, soul and hand are brought into connection, interacting with another, they determine a practice. We are no longer familiar with this practice. We're into the lemons, not a farm, not the long haul experience. And look how quickly our experience has changed now, from day to day with new technology. The role of the hand in production has become more modest, and the place it filled in storytelling lies waste. The old coordination of the soul, the eye, and the hand, which emerges in Valerie's words, is that of the artisan, which we encounter whenever the art of storytelling is at home. In fact, one can go and ask oneself whether the relationship of the storyteller to his material, human life, is not in itself a craftsman's relationship, fashioning the raw material of experience. So instead of fashioning leather or glass or wood, what's happening is the fashioning of experience. So I had mentioned, I think we should go for a coffee now, but I had mentioned last class, I was suspicious of this sort of sense of decline in storytelling, and that's why I was interested in showing you this a film about Mexican corridos, which there's a new one every day, there's a new vallenato in Colombia every day, talking about current events in song, very commercialized. I just think I saw the guy on the movie saying he'll write you one for $1,000, whereas the young guy who's the centre of the film, he doesn't make a penny, but he's got hundreds of song stories. So there's a lot of things to pull apart and analyse there. But basically, the question was, how true is it that storytelling is in decline in the West? Has something like it replaced it? Is there a huge vacuum? What do you do with a world which is so fluid, where people are moving from non-Western societies, to Western societies, and so on and so forth. I mean, does it really matter? Is that a big point or not? To what extent is he right? Is he wrong? Or who cares? I don't know how to answer those questions. There's a few other points about the essay as a whole. One thing I'd like to say about this decline of storytelling, loss is such an attractive feeling. So when I read out that quote, and I love it, and I get a sense that you love it too, no problem with loving it, but you've always got to have a little demon inside you which says it's so easy to get off on something disappearing. I mean, it's incredibly sad, if true. It's incredibly wrong. But there's something so enjoyable about that type of loss. You enjoy your sense of loss. It's a very complex emotion, and I think we should, we need to be aware of it, and wonder what the next step might be. I think we should have a coffee, and we should be prepared to talk about the face of death. I think this is a very powerful insight that Benjamin has about the relationship of storyteller to death. The relationship of the story to, he says death is what gives authority to the story. And he gives a couple of examples. The examples are really strange. They're not only stories, some stories which have death in them, but they're stories about the face. He has this incredible, this is what Benjamin is at his most delightful and beautiful best, You can sort of follow him, but you can't really. Where he talks about what happens to the face of a dying person. And this is before people die with tubes in them and stuck in an emergency ward and all that shit. Most people died pretty young, I guess, up till 1850 in the West, 1880, 1900. And they died quickly, I think. And sometimes they could, call all their friends and family in. This is a very romanticized version of death. Have any of you read Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich? I don't want to die after reading that. I decided I wasn't going to die. What about you? No way. Never going to die. Yeah. That is, that's tough. Because the guy takes an awful long time to die. Hates everyone around. Everyone around him hates him. Pretend not to. It just gets worse and worse. Takes several months. Let's forget Ivan Ilyich. It might even happen to Ivan Ilyich. But Benjamin has this crazy idea that the dying person gets pictures of her or himself throughout life, which she or he didn't know about. And these pictures, like a face like a movie screen or something, or a photographic plate, come surfacing up. I don't quite know how this works. And the people around see this face, and they see these previous lives, you might say, previous moments in life of one's being come forth. And then Benjamin has this grandiloquent end of that section, somewhere around here. And that's what imparts authority to the storyteller. You go, oh my God. It's like, this is really heavy and interesting, fabulous. But don't forget Ivan Ilyich. Benjamin frequently towards the second half, which I'm not allowed to experience now, brings in material again, the glass, the silver, the leather, the precious stones. Russia has a lot of precious stones. Most precious stones come outside of Western Europe. Madagascar, Mexico, India, probably lots of other places in the Middle East. Lapis lazuli, Afghanistan, and so forth. That's part of my colour book. It's sort of part of one of my things I found absolutely fascinating. It's like Western Europe's got a lot of good stuff. Really great stuff. This comes out of here. Very exotic. And he repeats twice the story of the Alexandrite, which is a type of semi-precious, whatever that means. a story that Leskov has, and how this Alexandrite has mystical power. It's like a person, and it's superhuman. It's like a divinatory force, right? So the relationship of death to natural history, and the relationship of natural history to the material of the world, you might say, the materiality of the world, is very scored like a sort of in a musical scores in these different sections, which is also something so fascinating to talk about. The story is the bird which hatches the egg of experience. Boredom is like the bird which hatches the egg of experience. That's another section somewhere around here. The place of boredom in storytelling, which I believe finally occurred to him when he was sitting on the boat day after day. Well, he just went from Hamburg to Barcelona. I mean, that's nothing, you know. Wait till you're like traveling on a ship from Australia to Liverpool or something. Imagine the centuries before these voyages that took months. And anyway, boredom, you don't have to be on a ship to be bored. But that, your friend Heidegger talks about boredom, right? Trying to get a handle on nothingness and so forth. Boredom in this section in Benjamin is tied to hearing stories with your ears when your hands are doing something else. It's like me listening to the radio when I'm washing up or something. Again, it's very romanticized. Remember Ivan Illich. Never forget Ivan. So here I am weaving, and people on either side of me are telling stories. But if you go to a weaver's workshop, say in Kabul or anywhere else, you know, it's not so nice. I mean, it's tough. So how you individually can find the truth in these images or scenes that I'm transmitting, you know, it's tricky. But the notion that you're involved in some habitual activity, you know, that body rhythm could be important there, and that there's someone who's telling you this story, and it soaks into you without you thinking too much about it, and then sometime later on you become the storyteller, transmitting it. I think that's a very fascinating relationship of body to habit, to boredom, and so on. The fairy tale, let's talk about fairy tales when we come back. I think I'm absolutely fascinated by the idea of the fairy tale. How they came into Western Europe. You know, it's basically, well, my opinion, I could be wrong. It's basically peasant women telling stories to rich kids in the 18th century in France in particular. And these stories get gathered up by some well-to-do person and published as fairy stories. I forget the famous set I'm thinking of.
The Brothers Grimm?
Before. Yeah, but the Brothers Grimm is a similar sort of thing. But who cares where they came from in a way? But it's one of those like conventional tradition shocks you get. Oh my God, you know, is that really what happened? I thought they were around forever. I had no idea that there might be this class gendered thing going on, and then it gives you makes you a bit, you know, sharpens you to hear stories like that. But the nature of the fairy stories is what I'm much more interested in, and whether we can write fairy stories, which also pertain to the very real world in which we live. And he has a couple of pages, and basically, you know, I think of Zoya here. The fairy story is interesting because it has this promise, it has this hope of optimism. You can escape from a shitty situation. And he uses obviously he's referring to Brecht here without naming him. The fairy story, like Jack and the Beanstalk, the cunning. You know, Jack's a sort of dumb guy, yeah, but you know he's got a fair amount of cunning, has a lot of luck, a lot of courage, persistence. opportunism. Drake was the greatest opportunist in the world, so to speak. He could really bend with the wind, and so on and so forth. So there's a few things that we could talk about when we come back. So let's